Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Insight Intelligence podcast. And today on the podcast, we have one of the country's top psychologists with more than 23 years experience and influencing more than 5,000 lives across the country. Please help me welcome Rebecca Cushway.
Hi,
Rebecca. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show. What a great experience to have you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, we've been told you're a very fascinating woman.
Oh, wow.
You've been working across the Australian native communities. You've been working inside of Queensland and New South Wales Health. Mm-hmm. What is it that you do?
Okay, so I'm an organisational psychologist. So basically what I do is work with organisations, usually leadership groups, but sometimes people on the front line, managers, to help them affect change in their organisations. Often I go into a culture that's, I don't like overusing the word, but it's toxic. And usually people are throwing up their hands and going, what do we do? So we need help, we need guidance. So my role is not to walk in and put people on the couch and talk to them. It's more about strategising with the leaders, working with people to understand behaviour and how it's impacting others, and looking at ways with people to move forward.
You mentioned there about sitting them down on the couch. I'm sure a lot of people assume this is what's happening in psychology.
Yes.
It's an old meme.
Yes.
What does modern psychology look like? Because you've been doing this for 23 years.
Yeah.
You've influenced more than 5,000 lives.
Yep.
What does your role look like on the ground?
So on the ground, my role might involve sitting a few people on the couch and talking to them about their goals, their career, their aspiration, their potential. That's when I'm in a growth role where I'm helping them to realise their potential. I'd say that's about 10% of my role. A lot of my role, though, is at a group intervention level. So often people will say, we have a bullying issue in our workplace, we don't know what to do, we've tried this and this, can you please come in? And my first, point of call are the people who are being most affected, and trying to get an understanding of their stories and why this is happening and where this is coming from, and what's in place in the organisation that might be keeping that holding pattern that's hurting people. So I do a lot of direct intervention with groups. In the background, though, we need the leaders to be strong and sustainable, moral and ethical in order to change that. If we don't affect the leaders, we don't affect change. So often in the background, we're doing some reflective work with leaders, getting them to think about what are the things, the triggers in the organisation or even in their behaviour that could be creating challenges for people. What are the things that aren't in their control that are creating challenges that they can see as well? And how do we build their strength and make them more robust in order to have genuine, authentic conversations with people to live what they're saying that they need to live, and to make the calls they sometimes need to call that they don't want to make. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, vertically what we would do. Yeah.
It's a really interesting point, right? Because whenever you've been in a toxic work environment, and I think, again, that's just part of the human condition, right? We've all had bosses we don't like.
Yes.
We've all had jobs that we actually really don't like and we hate, and it breeds contempt and resentment. And I've had people within my organisation come to work, do the absolute bare bones minimum, even though I set up an environment that is conducive for success.
Yeah.
You know, I understand what their goals are, what their dreams are, what their aspirations are. I've helped many people over the years leave the job that I've given to them to start their own business.
Wonderful.
And I've been really encouraging of that. But in spite of all the things that I've done, you can never get inside somebody's head and control how they think or feel about that. Is there a common trait that you see when you go inside organisations about why toxic environments are toxic like that? Does it come from a leadership perspective, or is it at an individual level?
So in most circumstances, and there's a lot of research on this, it's a really controversial topic that you're raising. In most organisations, and particularly in the health context, the way the system is set up, and it's extremely hierarchical. And, police not that different, military not that different. Traditionally in those organisations you find more bullying because, there's so much system and process, and bad behaviour can sometimes hide behind that. for one of the reasons. The other reasons is people on the ground particularly in health, they're the ones that are giving the frontline care to people that are actually seeing the observations, feel quite restricted sometimes in what they want to do. So sometimes they work around a system and influence others indirectly in a way that might not be healthy or appropriate. In many cases, though, leadership behaviour will be the key driver.
Yeah.
So if the leader doesn't have a good set of leadership skills and they've only got one method to increase productivity, generally that method involves pressure or threat. You've got a huge opportunity there for bullying to be an issue in that organisation. If people don't feel safe to speak up because there's implied threats about their career, they're not going to speak up. Because I do a lot of work in rural and remote areas, there's not a lot of options. So that culture becomes quite insidious in the organisation.
Right. I have people ask me all the time, hey, Rob, you were in the military, you must be a really disciplined guy. And it's a very common misconception, actually.
Really? Yeah.
Is that the vast majority of people in the military are very, very undisciplined.
Wow.
In the real world. And the reason that you have discipline and you appear to have a lot of discipline is because you turn up on time, you're wearing the right uniform, you've got your boots are shined, your hair's cut, your beret's right, your nails are clipped. You look like $1 million, right? And people in the military look like that. But the reason they look like that is because the boss is waving a really big stick.
Yeah.
And there's the culture of military is that you need to learn to follow orders, and you follow orders in order to get things done.
Yeah.
But that's not effective by itself.
No.
And leaders within the military recognise that there's a hierarchy, there's a structure to be followed and whatnot, but that is not what makes the Australian Defence Force one of the finest in the world.
Yeah.
What makes it one of the finest in the world is people recognising that there's a structure there, but really good leaders that help motivate the troops to understand why it is what they're doing, and the inclusive nature of it, the decentralised nature of what it is what makes an effective fighting force. It's got nothing to do with being... discipline, in my view, in the military is nothing to do with being effective. It's got to do with understanding why you're doing what you're doing, and the leader being able to communicate those whys really effectively. And the military is really good at communicating that.
Absolutely. And I think that's your analogy is perfect, because for me, discipline's a little bit like systems and processes. You need them. You need to know where roughly the boundaries are. Which is what
the military is, and what a police force is, or a fire brigade is, or even a corporation. They have boundaries and a framework and a skeleton which they work within.
Yeah, but the leaders are the ones that really affect that extra performance.
Yep.
And that's really what my role's about. It's not just about repairing the damage. It's the part of the role I really like is when I get to affect performance and people...
And change.
And they surprise themselves. That's actually the best part of the role.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Very nice.
Previously, you mentioned bullying. And I'm sure a lot of people don't understand what bullying is, and they probably find it hard to identify it.
Yeah.
How can you help the audience today identify bullying in their workplace?
Wow.
What would they see? What would they hear? What emotions would they be feeling?
Yeah, how would they feel? Because I'm not sure if, he's saying something that's damaging my ego. Is he bullying me, or is it just
is
me?
It impacting my self-esteem, my self-worth? What is it?
So one of the things about bullying is it's a word that's... bullying is a prolific problem, but it is an overused word. And formally, bullying is about a repetitive, targeted behaviour over an extended period of time. People can be inappropriate and hurtful, but not be bullying someone. So it's really important to understand that bullying is targeted. So I think my first boss, and probably one of the reasons that I do what I do now is because of the experience with my first boss, who indiscriminately sexually harassed most of the women in the workplace, young psychologists.
Wow.
So, and I actually stood up to him, and I was 23, 22 years old, straight out of uni, that kind of thing. And I remembered I'm not copying that. I just had that thought, I'll put up with a lot, but that I won't put up with. I don't think he was bullying me, and I know now that he wasn't. He just had no control over his behaviour.
He was just a jerk.
He was a jerk.
There's a difference between a bully and a jerk.
He was a complete jerk, that's right. Did he have the potential to bully someone? Yes. So you talked before about traits. When you're being bullied, there's usually some sort of power So you feel like you're powerless. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person is more senior to you, or often it is. They could be more junior to you, but they might hold social power. And bullying is most destructive when your social reputation is damaged. So the first thing is, if you know you're being bullied, you feel powerless. It's repeated behaviour, and it seems to be coming from the same person.
That what you're describing happened to me in the military.
Wow.
Yeah. When I was in the Navy, when I first joined HMAS Brisbane on my very first ship, a person that was assigned to me, because I was just a new guy, some young 17, 18-year-old kid joining the ship. It's all those things that you described, from them being in a senior position of rank, them talking to me at a really condescending level, and consistently doing it and not helping me to find my way or to level up or become the person that I needed to become in order to fulfill the role that I was in. And he was just awful. And I swear, I was only on that ship for, I think it was like 4 months on a quick trip. When we got back to Australia, I couldn't get off there fast enough.
I bet.
And then when I got to my next ship, I had the most incredible experience and the best experience in the Navy that one could ask for. It's the poster child experience is what I had. I travelled the world, a pocket full of money, got to go and kick indoors and jump out of helicopters and all sorts of great things. But prior to that, I had the most awful experience because of one person. And I swear to you, I don't condone violence or fighting, but if I saw that guy in a pub, I'd chin him as hard as I could, because he was just in a position of authority and rank, and just stomped on me like that. But physically, I could have crushed him in a heartbeat. And it triggered something inside of me, and I've never felt that way before, and I've never felt that way since, because I've never been in an environment like that since. It's an interesting experience.
Can I ask a question there? You had that experience. What did you do about it, or what did you fail to do about it?
Well, I knew that I wasn't going to be on there permanently. I knew that this was a short trip. It was only a couple of months. So I kind of put up with it because, excuse the pun, I didn't want to rock the boat, so to speak. And it would be easier to not do anything and just to crack that guy in the mouth when I saw him ashore. But I never got a chance to do that. And I honestly felt like violence was the only answer, because that was the only thing that person was going to understand. I even toyed with the idea of hucking him over the side one night.
Wow.
No joke. And that's how bad I felt about it. And there's plenty of people out there that I've heard in workplaces that have had the same types of feelings. And when it happens to a man, it's quite different when it happens to a guy than when it happens to a woman. And usually to a woman, it's a guy perpetrating that, not always, but a lot of the time in a harassment case, it's like that. But gosh, it was a very, very awful experience for me. And I'm glad it happened early on in my career, and I'm glad it only lasted a short amount of time, because I just put it behind me and moved on. And I think that's kind of what you do anyway in life. And I never let it affect my career or say, I can't say a bad word about my experience in the military just because I had a rough couple of months with a moron and a jerk at work. It was no big deal.
Yeah, so you obviously had the capability then to kind of see it for what it was. You could see an end in sight.
I think part of it was I could have grabbed him by the back of his pants and the scruff of his neck and hucked him over the side if I wanted to.
And you
if
saw
I really
yourself
wanted
powerful in one situation more than him.
Yeah, he didn't take that away from me. Yeah, exactly.
Whereas often in situations, what you might see, or what I certainly see, are people that really have no other options, are quite powerless.
I could see how repressing that would be.
That's very repressing.
Yeah, it was horrible.
And you talk about the women, the man, woman. Actually, a lot of bullying women on women is very common
it's prevalent
in
too.
the workplace. From underlings, kids bullying parents, all sorts of things, peers bullying peers, in the workplace. I'm talking in the school environment as well, because sometimes we do work in schools. In the workplace, you might see frontline people being bullying upwards their manager, and we'll get rid of this one. I certainly hear that a lot in health. We'll see how long this one lasts, and they're on a mission to exit that person because that person's trying to change the environment. So it's prolific. I think what you described about the emotions are not uncommon. So people who typically are bullied and it's been prolonged experience significant distress. Often over time they do get diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder because what it does, it fundamentally rocks the core of a person and it threatens either their life, or they perceive it threatens their life, or their reputation, which means I can't function in the world because I need to function with other people. So it creates a lot of challenge for people. Yeah.
Rob, in that situation, what emotions or range of emotions did you go through?
Fear was a big one. I was scared to death of the guy, even though I could have crushed him like a bug on the bottom of my shoe. Anger, rage, mostly like a, why would you do that type thing? But it's not so much the emotions that I felt, because at the time it's hard to recognize why you feel like that, because you just get triggered, and I just feel this rising anger within me all the time. And it took immense control not to lash out verbally and particularly physically as well. Because I kind of come from not from a rough upbringing, but I played a lot of football. I did a lot of boxing, a lot of fighting, and that was kind of what I knew. And I thought, if this guy wants to shape up to me, and it's just a very masculine thing that happened. But the thing that I remember most about it is when I left that ship and I got off that ship in Perth. As soon as it got on Australian soil, I was out of there, and I was on Christmas leave, and I came back from Christmas leave, and I joined HMAS Melbourne, and I got to that ship, and you know what? I remember, I can even feel it now as I'm saying it to you guys. I felt relief. I felt incredible relief that I was away from that person. And everybody there was so nice. I couldn't believe how nice everybody was. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm home. And I had the most incredible next 4 years of my life. That was some of the best experiences you could ever hope for.
Rebecca, Rob had those resources that he could have, like he said before, he could have crushed the guy like a bug. Should have he done that, what would have been the ramifications to him at an emotional level if he had taken that action?
Well, I think momentarily he would have felt very powerful.
Probably would have went, see?
Yeah, see, I won. However, over time, that's a hollow victory.
I'm glad I never did it when I look back at it like that.
Why do you say that?
With the benefit of hindsight and maturity, that's like a hot-headed teenage kid that should not have behaved like that. If I had hucked him over the side, I don't know what happened to him.
Yeah.
Then what would have happened to you?
Then you got to live with that, right? Like, what a stupid thing to think, or a stupid thing to even say out aloud. But I genuinely felt like that. I walk past him in the breezeway, there's no one else around. It's like 11 o'clock at night, it's dark as. We just huck the guy over the guardrail, no one would know.
You talk about, you had a really, sensory, physical upbringing, particularly with your footy and, particularly being in the military. I've got a son, very similar.
Same thing.
Not in the military yet, but wants to play football, and whole other story. But the challenge is for him at 15, and I think it would have been for you at however old you were, is you got to realise, your mind realises that you have to turn off the adrenaline and you have to be able to learn to deal with stuff, jerks, all the time. And that constant adrenaline and that type of reaction is actually fatiguing on the body.
Very.
And if you find yourself in those situations over and over again, so if you and what we know about people who are bullied, sometimes, not always, they can then become the bully because that makes them feel powerful. Otherwise, they may just shut down. So if they don't learn those coping strategies in order to mitigate that, those two extremes are possibilities, not for the majority, but it can happen. So it's about learning other ways to deal with that. And one of the so those emotions of anger, power, rage, all of those sorts of things, they dissipate very quickly. And then there's the feeling of guilt often. I shouldn't have done that. And then there's the feeling of resentment. And then the next jerk comes along. And if you haven't done any work or used those other resources that we all know we have, you have the same reaction. The more you have that kind of bite reaction, the harder it is for you to control the situation long term, and then patterns become entrenched. So I think you asked about personality types. There's no proof that there's a certain personality type that bullies. It's actually usually born out of experience and repeated experience. And when you've been a victim and a severe victim of bullying, often you're more of a target for more bullying. And at some point in time, you either crack and go, I'm just going to fight back, or you see a lot of people, and you might see this in your workplaces, they just lay down and go, it's just too hard, and they kind of wither. So
Which is awful too.
Which is horrific.
Yeah, it's awful.
And having good resources and they're learned resources. Bullying is a learned behaviour. Yes, some people have tendencies to be more aggressive, more dominant, more passive aggressive, whatever. But bullying itself is a learned behaviour. And back to organisations, in some cases it's a behaviour of survival. If you've got a bad leader in a dysfunctional organisation, people feel like they need to bully in order to survive.
One of the really interesting things that we were talking about just before we hit the record button here was you get to affect change with a lot of people. And Daniel asked you, and he mentioned there in the introduction, that you maybe about 5,000 people you've helped over your career throughout different workplaces, but I'd suggest to you that's probably 4 or 5 times the amount of that, because I go to work and my partner is the direct recipient of the work that you do, and so are the children and all the other people around me. So it's excellent what you do, and I love how you described your favourite thing was seeing how you affect change in a workplace. Can you talk about that? What does that make you feel like? How does that put the fire in your belly and keep you going?
You know, I think my favourite clients to work with are the ones where they walk in. I've got a background in selection as well, so I'm usually quite good at judging people's qualities very quickly and getting a sense of how they perceive those qualities. And
where does that feeling come from? Is that in your tummy, or is that in your mind, or is it down lower?
Look, I think it's both.
Is it an intuition, a female thing?
No, I don't think so.
Trained psychologist
I think it's more observation,
right.
And watching behaviours and joining the dots in terms of what people say very quickly, and that's a learned skill.
What do you see about this guy when you look at him?
Oh, I'll come back to you on that. I need a bit more time.
I'm wondering how quickly you can
be careful. Be careful.
I see very open and good listening. That's what I see with Daniel. But one of the things that, you know, that underconfident but high potential person is a great person to work with.
Yeah, I bet.
And, you know, just currently I'm working with a leader who the first time she walked into my office, it was for private coaching. I said to her, she didn't know what she was a psychologist or learning to be like me. And I said, you're actually going to be a general manager. And she's like, and I don't often be prophetic in that way, but she ticked off all the boxes that you would expect to see in a general manager.
You don't normally read their tarot cards, but
don't
you
read tarot cards, no. And I think she looked at me like I was crazy. It's
she
like,
thought you were reading tarot cards.
There's no way you could. And how do you see that?
It's
and
the
I'm
traits,
like, you do this, you do this, you do this. Traits and behaviours. So a lot of her behaviours were learnt. And if I talk about her behaviours, she was so determined to improve herself, and she had proven and had a track record of improving herself, taking on feedback, being open to feedback. Her interpersonal skills had been pigeonholed by her current manager. In fact, he told her before he gave her an opportunity that I don't think you have very good leadership skills. And my feedback to her was, everything you've told me suggests you've got exemplary leadership skills. So back to how that links to bullying, my work with her in coaching is to reflect her behaviour, but also to reflect her leader's behaviour and show her the dysfunction in that. And then give her strategies on how to deal with that dysfunction. Some of those strategies meant going around him.
Very nice, very nice. I love the psychologist giving us the psychological answer that we can use. I'm taking it away. I've got it now. I know how to deal with that person.
So in going back to Rob's situation, you've got 2 employees here in an organisation who bring value to the workplace. And I know from the people that I work with, if they fire somebody over this, they lose a strategic advantage in their business.
Absolutely.
So would you work with both of these people? Would you work with one of them? How would you operate here?
So as the leader, I think my first point of call would be to speak to each of them individually and get a sense of, you know, tell me a little bit about what's going on with your relationship with this person, because I'm noticing a few things. Then I stop talking, then I let them talk. And my strategy is talk less. I know I'm talking a lot now, but in a coaching scenario, talk less, let them talk, ask questions. Asking questions about, what are they experiencing and what are they feeling and what are they seeing. Often when people are in conflict with each other, they're mixing up the feeling and the experience with what's actually happening. So I want to use language that separates those things. And is that what you're seeing, or is that what you're feeling, or what it is? Because people struggle with conflict and bullying and all of those things often out of a lack of awareness. So people don't necessarily come to work going, I'm going to bully Daniel today and I'm going to bully Rob today. It's just a response in most cases, not all cases. So that's the first thing. And then my next step is to say, how do you think that person would be perceiving you given all of this? 9 times out of 10, they've never thought about it. So
there's no self-awareness around their behaviour.
Correct. Impact on others. And then what do you think it would be like for them in their shoes? So my next step is to build perspective. And for me, my experience has told me that the thing that actually usually wins in the end is when you can build perspective in the other person to a point where they have some level of compassion. Doesn't mean they have to love them, doesn't mean they have to be best buddies, doesn't mean they have to go out to lunch, but they can see where that person's coming from. They can see their struggle, and then we can move forward together. My general strategy is to talk separately. First, gain them agreement to talk together and not throw them in a room together by themselves, because that's usually a disaster, but have a facilitated conversation with them that's really structured. And the things that I would discuss in that facilitated conversation tend to be about what is it that you need from this person, and we would have primed that prior to them to coming in, and what do you think that person might need from you, and vice versa, and what expectations do you have moving forward. If there's a need, and I avoid this in workplaces because often mediation isn't a highly successful strategy. So I tend to not go into the conflict side of it. What are the things that are frustrating you about this person when they're together? Because that just puts negativity out there and off they go on their tangents. So I deal with the frustrations separately, get them to a point of recognising their needs. When people can't articulate their needs, you've got conflict ready to happen. And once they're ready to articulate their needs, sit them together, but work with them. So what is it that you need from this person, and so forth?
There's a really important question that you ask about the value of people in a workplace, because you're in danger of losing both of them. So it's a great question, and thank you for your response there. I want to tell and share a really funny story with you guys about that exact thing that you're talking about, and it happened to me. So if I rewind and I fast forward from the Navy and I rewind back to the Army, I was in the Army after I was in the Navy. Yeah. I had this exceptional mediator, workplace psychologist like you in my platoon. He was my platoon sergeant. And so he's generally, the platoon sergeant is a little bit older than everybody else. He's been in the Army longer than everybody else. But this fella, he was a young guy, right? And nobody knew who he was when he joined. And it turned out he was the Australian Army Golden Gloves. Oh. Right, so he's a boxer.
Wow.
And he was fit as, he was a squared away guy, and he was a really good leader as well, right? Because he was young, he was on the younger side, he was squared away, he was an athlete, and he was really nice to all of us. And my role in the platoon was as the sub-unit PTI, or sub-unit physical training instructor. And my task was to take the physical training on a daily basis. And there'd be 30 guys every morning that would say, hey, what are we doing today? Hey, what are we doing today? Hey, what are we doing today? And eventually I would write the program down, I'd stick it on the notice board, and I wouldn't even speak. I'd just point at the note, and they go over there and do that. And this went on, when I first got my qualification, I joined the platoon, it was all a little bit different.
Yep.
The Sarge didn't have to run it, I ran it, it was really good. And eventually he recognised something that was happening within the groups of people that I was taking for physical training in the morning that I didn't recognise. Because I was just rocking up, I was taking the lessons, I was training people, I was getting the work out for myself, it was all really good. And he recognised that I was starting to annoy those people.
Wow.
Because I was standing at the front of the class going, hurry up, come on, more push-ups. And I was doing it as well, but I was kind of beasting them, and I didn't realise I was doing it because I didn't have that self-awareness. And shut up, we're in an infantry battalion, just get on with it type thing. And one day we came to work, and it was like 6 o'clock in the morning, I got to work, and he goes, I'm taking PT today. The Sarge said that. And I said, oh, thank God, get a little break, and now I can go and have a workout, like properly, not train and try and get a workout at the same time. Anyway, he lined everyone up out the front of the accommodation, and he said, righto, and he chucked some boxing gloves at me, and I put the boxing gloves on, and he goes, I'm first. I said, first what? He goes, let's go, someone timing it. And literally it was about 15 guys. I went round after round with 15 guys. And what he recognised that I was annoying all of them, and now they had a chance to lay one or two on me. And at first, there was just no way I could defend from him. He was the Golden Gloves. You know, I just covered up. And I think I was on the ground, and he was laying a slipper into me as well. And I got up, and by the time I got up, he'd given the gloves to somebody else. And then I looked around, there was like 3 pairs of gloves. And people were lining up ready. I'm like, all right, come on, what do you got? And we boxed. That was our morning. Well, that was my morning PT, and everyone else was laughing at me. But you know what? After that, it brought us all together. And the next day, I got up there and I ran the session, and they were like, "What are we doing today, Rob? Come on, man, let's go!" And it was it was a really kind of very masculine, very blokey way to handle a workplace problem. But he was so unbelievably on point with his management, and he was so on point reading everybody else. Yeah. And then he thought, Rob can handle that. That'll be all right. Yeah. And, you know, truth be told, I was like a little bit scared, especially when he shaped up to me. Yeah. And then he started, he could hit hard. Yeah. And then he knocked me down type thing. And I was like, gosh. And I got up and went again. And it was kind of fun. So it was a really interesting experience.
Yeah.
Rebecca, what's the equivalent to a set of boxing gloves in a workplace?
In a real workplace.
What's the equivalent, and how can people have fun with this?
Yeah, so...
Which is what that was in the end. It ended up being fun, and it brought us closer together.
And the boxing gloves, you know, are the safety net, really.
Yeah.
Of, you know, because, you know, it's going to hurt more, I guess, if you hit with your hand. Yeah. Not that I box, but I assume. So the equivalent is a session where people... so one of the things we do is called group norming. And you get the group to identify behaviours, not people, that might be creating angst in the culture, behaviours that are really contributing positively. And, you know, they always come up with 5 times more positive than negatives than positives. That's usually what happens in a toxic culture. And then the next, you know, place I might go to is, you know, are these any of us not demonstrating any of these negative behaviours? And everyone's saying we contribute to those, or do any of us kind of just stand there and let those go by and they contribute, and then people start going, they start owning those behaviours.
Do people like look down at the carpet and like look away from
the
psychologist gaze going, are you doing that? No,
they do. They do. And this is why I work with the leader first, because often the leader is part of my group.
Right.
I usually get the leader to take responsibility, and I will prime them before the session and talk to them about, if you're here and you're waiting to see who's doing what, and you haven't owned the behaviours that are obvious to you, and you're not owning them and you're not genuinely owning them, this isn't going to work. And most times the leaders have stood up and done that. In fact, there was a situation, it was a critical situation a couple of years ago out west, where the leader actually took responsibility and saw it. So it's not, it can't be fake. It has to be owned, but clearly no awareness. This guy just had no awareness. He owned it in front of the group, and there were some extremely challenging situations going on there, and complex situations as well. He owned it, and that was the defining point that changed the culture, where then people in the group were going, okay, well, we can keep throwing mud at him, or we can go, look, he's stuffed up, which is kind of the language that they were using. He knows that he messed that up. He knows that that's had a bad effect. He's taken responsibility. Are we going to just keep bashing him with it, guys? Because he was getting bullied by his staff. But he was also being accused of bullying, so it was quite a messy one. And they've moved forward. Interestingly enough, when we talk about personalities, there were a couple of people in there that just point blank refused, because I think they had so much damage. But the damage was baggage. I don't think the damage... There was recent damage because there was change involved and they weren't coping. And I think there was a bit of argy-bargy in order to make that change happen. It wasn't done well. But sometimes people are so damaged that they just can't see a way forward.
Folks hold on to it, don't they?
Well, that emotional baggage, can you leave it at the door?
I think,
or do you take it wherever you go?
I think...
People carry it with them. They're heavy bags.
Hi, I'm Daniel. Here's my emotional baggage.
Yeah. You know, I think, you know, I've got emotional baggage. I'm sure you've got emotional baggage. You've got I don't have any emotional baggage.
So I've got a box out of me. He just
throws people off the ship.
Well, you know, they do say that boxing, that upper body is really good for depression, because it does actually. There's a lot of evidence to show that.
And there's a lot of anger in depression.
And there's a lot of anger in depression. That's right. So it's actually a really good thing, as long as it's a bag, not a human. But
humans are fun too.
So, you know, even coming here today, you know, sometimes I've got to go, there's a lot going on in my life. I've got to leave my emotional baggage at the door. your emotional baggage doesn't stay at the door. It is about a momentary choice of going, I'm in this conversation with you. It's about being mindful. And the more I practice being in this conversation with you or whoever's on my black couch, as Mario calls it, in my office, bless you. The more I do that, the easier my muscle is to leave it at the door. But there are days when my resilience might be not as low. Maybe I'm a little bit more worn out. This is for anyone, and it's harder to do that. The key for me is being mindful about the conversation. I think mindfulness is really important. It is an overused, term, but it's overused, but it's so important. And the other key is having compassion for yourself and for the other people around you. So those things build muscle to maybe it doesn't leave it at the door, but the bag's on the floor.
One of the things that I've learnt in the last year of 200 or so podcasts that I've done is I've had a lot of conversations like this. And when you have a conversation like this, whether it's with one person, a group of people, the point is your phone is turned off, you got nowhere else to be, and you're present with the people that you're with.
Yeah.
And it's a really empowering thing to be present like that. And on my show, when I tell stories, sometimes the stories are really impactful and sometimes they're really, really heavy. And I need to take some time to decompress on the end of them. I've told stories of domestic violence, of suicide, of PTSD, heavy stuff that you deal with every day, but you're trained to deal with that. And I'm just a kind of a facilitator of those things. But what it does do is it shines a spotlight on the emotional baggage that I actually don't have. And life is pretty damn good when you compare it to what other people have and the other things that other people carry with them. So I've learnt to really be present when I'm on a podcast with people, even when they're sneezing, I'm present, I don't get distracted. And I've learned to decompress on the other side of it. And in that decompression, that's really helped me with any emotional baggage. So maybe the people listening and watching can take that away as a little tool.
Absolutely. It's a great skill to be able to do.
May I ask you a question from a client to a psychologist? Is it okay to have a bad day?
Oh my goodness, yes. I have them regularly. It's not normal to always have a great day. I worry that people have really high expectations, particularly when they come into organisations and maybe they're starting their career and they have high expectations and then they have like a little failure or someone says something a bit off, like you had a significant one. But if people don't see that as normal, you can't experience the highs without the lows. You can't experience that at all. We actually are built to have a range of emotion. And bad days are normal. For me, the bad days are learning experiences. And, I'm probably learning more about myself in the second half of my career, because I think the first half of my 23 years was all about head down, quick, achieve, kick, how many clients, how many this, how many that. And now it's much more about who am I being in this and what am I choosing and where am I going? And how does that affect my family? Because you affect one person, you affect a group, you affect a clan. Everything's interconnected. Yeah. So it's really important to allow yourself to have the bad days. If you need to have the bad day, what are your strategies to deal with it? I've
got a really good life hack for you if you're having a rotten day, because we all have rotten days. One of the things that you could do is, you're having a bad day, no matter how bad it is, when you get home, turn the news on. Someone will always be having a worse day than you. I can absolutely guarantee that. And it's about perspective, right? The thing that happened that was negative at work is really actually not that bad compared to that guy getting blown up in Kabul or whatever happened to him. It's like really interesting.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us and having organisational psychologist Rebecca Cushway to join us. We've enjoyed our 23 years of experience inside of 45 minutes and stories from working with more than 5,000 successful clients. So thank you for joining us today. And for those people who'd like to learn more about you and your work, where can we find more information about you?
Okay, so obviously Careers Excelled, Organisational Psychology. And you can contact me through the website. You can call the office and I'd love to have a chat to you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beck.